I think it's very likely that you have heard the term trick weapon before. However, you might not exactly know what such a thing is, so I'm going to explain. There's a really good game called Bloodborne, and that game has several weapons that have a trick to them. The first weapon you get in the game is the saw cleaver, if you choose that as your first weapon, and most people do, so I'll just tell you about the cleaver. The saw cleaver has a handle with a wheel at the end. The wheel allows the cleaver blade to extend further, as shown on screen. This lets the user either protect their hand and do more forceful strikes, or get more reach with the blade. This weapon is so incredibly cool, and it is genius with its design. It might not be effective in modern times, but in the medieval era, this thing would rip through beasts with ease. Another weapon I'm quite fond of is the rakuyo. This weapon is two swords with handles that hook into one another, allowing the user to connect or disconnect them very easily. This lets the user fight with both at once, or stick them together and carry a gun. This weapon is my second favorite, besides the saw cleaver. My third favorite weapon is the Blade of Mercy. Blades of Mercy? I don't know. The weapon is two long daggers that slide into one another to make a longer blade. They're a cool concept, but I'm not sure they would work all too well in real life. Regardless, I love them. They're super cool. There's also Simon's Bowblade, which I found after designing the Assassin's Switchblade, by the way. It's a cursed sword that transforms into a bow, which can then shoot arrows. I still think the switchbow is cooler, but I decided to feature the Bowblade in this video because it's from Bloodborne. Next up is the church pick. This weapon is a large sword that can have its blade extended into a pickaxe. It's pretty cool, not my favorite, but it's alright. Lastly, we have the threaded cane. It functions like a blade that can be concealed in the cane. It can be transformed into a whip, and that has more reach. So you saw the title, I'm sure of it. I'm going to put these weapons into D&D 5th edition. Each weapon will have its own profile and a special trick to it. I'm going to make these 6 weapons into D&D weapons. Starting with the saw cleaver, we have its profile here. It starts with its closed profile. This does 1d8 slashing damage with a 5-foot reach. You can use a bonus action to transform the weapon, changing its attack profile to its open state. The weapon now does 1d6 slashing damage, but it has the reach effect now, so it has a range of 10 feet rather than 5 feet. The weapon is considered to be a martial weapon, as are all the weapons on this list, so if you don't have proficiency with martial weapons, you can't use it. The weapon costs 75 GP and weighs 5 pounds. The Rakuyo has the profile of a double-bladed scimitar in its combined mode, and the profile of 2 scimitars in its separate mode. In case you forgot, the scimitars do 1d6 damage each, and the double-bladed scimitar does 2d4 damage. It costs 1 bonus action to take them apart, or put them back together. Now, I hear you thinking, why not just have both weapons? Why use a unique trick weapon? Well, it weighs less and it costs less. That's why. Also, it's so much cooler and it gives your weapon more flavor. The weapon weighs 6 pounds and it costs 100 gold pieces. The Blades of Mercy are exactly the same as the Rakuyo, but the weapons are different. It functions as 2 short swords when they are separated and 1 long sword when they are together. The 2 short swords do 1d6 slashing damage, and the 1 long sword does 1d8 slashing damage. Like the others, it costs a bonus action to take them apart or put them together. The weapon costs 20 GP, which I know sounds cheap, but just take a look at the cost of long swords and short swords and tell me that again. It weighs 4 pounds for both pieces together, and the long sword allows you to wield another tool in your left hand, while the short swords let you do more damage. Editor's note: the short swords are finesse, but the long sword is not. The next weapon is Simon's Bowblade. This weapon functions as a long sword, and if you spend a bonus action to transform it into its bow state, it can fire arrows like a longbow. The long sword does 1d8 slashing damage with a range of 5 feet, but in its bow form, it does 1d8 piercing damage at a range of 150 feet, and the attack roll is done with disadvantage at a range of 600 feet, just like a normal longbow. This consumes arrows, of course, and the weapon costs 75 GP and it weighs 3 pounds. Arrows not included. We also have the church pick. This weapon has its 2 forms, and it does 1d8 slashing damage in its sword form and 1d8 piercing damage in its pick form. And of course, it costs a bonus action to change forms. It costs 20 GP and it weighs 3 pounds. I would have put more for this weapon, but I don't really care too much for it. It's not bad, but it's not my favorite. The last weapon on this list is the Threaded Cane. It has two forms, Blade and Whip. It takes a bonus action to swap forms, as always. The Whip form is a metal whip, so it does 1d4 slashing damage. The Whip form has the Reach property, so you can hit things 10 feet away with it. The other form does 1d6 damage, but with a shorter range at 5 feet. However, both forms of this weapon are finesse, so they can use your dexterity modifier. It's also cheap compared to the other weapons, 15 GP. It also weighs 3 pounds. So those are all the prominent trick weapons for Bloodborne in D&D. Feel free to ask your DM if you can use them, or if you are a DM, feel free to give your players these weapons. I hope you all loved them. Now on a side note, I was thinking about making an entire player class called the Hunter. The class was going to have a special ability to transform their weapon as a free action rather than a bonus action. This would allow them to do a few other things rather than wasting that bonus action switching weapon forms. Subscribe if you want to see that video, if I ever get around to making it. I'll see you all on the streets of Yharnam, hunters.